Why don't we go ahead and begin? Thanks for hanging in there a little bit with some of the just kind of getting techie stuff together. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about the story of Harry Potter today, and perhaps what could be useful to us as we think about the just kind of the season that we're in related to this kind of coronavirus, COVID sort of like isolation that we're all in. Um, but before we do that, let me tell you a little bit. If you're not familiar, let's journey a little bit towards the world of Harry Potter. And let me just kind of share a big, brief overview of what the story of Harry Potter is. So, the story of Harry Potter is about a boy whose parents were killed when he was actually just very little. He was an infant. And his parents were killed by this um, evil wizard, but person known as Voldemort. And and as a result of this boy grows up as an orphan, and he grows up in the home of his aunt and uncle, who end up being pretty mean and abusive towards him. And kind of throughout the time that he's there, he is never really invited into the family. He actually lives in this little area underneath the stairs, this cupboard underneath the stairs, and that's where he actually lives and sleeps for a long time. And kind of throughout the time, he realizes and knows that he is maybe a little bit different, but he's not really sure why. And then one day, through a series of magical events, he finds out that he's actually a wizard, and he actually has magical powers. And before you know it, he gets on a train, somewhat similar to the train that you see in the picture. We call it the Hogwarts Express, and he gets taken to a school. And this school is called the Hogwarts School of Wizardry and Witchcraft. And it's here that he begins to learn all of these spells and all of these things that he gets to learn about himself, and kind of what he can be able to do. They take classes just like college students take classes, and one of the classes that they take is Defense Against the Dark Arts. And this is one of their favorite classes because it is where they do most of the practical things. You know, they think it's kind of like students just ready to get into the real world and like, give me the tips already. Tell me what to do. And so this particular class is really exciting and one of the favorite for the students. And it becomes the most practical class for them, as while they're in school, you have who's kind of later referred to as Voldemort or Lord Voldemort. He ends up coming, and really his evil begins to infiltrate the world again. Before you know it, these kids are who are just in school are having to use some of these practical tools that they learn in Defense Against the Dark Arts in the real world, and they actually, through a series of different things, end up kind of keeping the evil at bay, and really good ends up winning in the end. That's the spoiler. Sorry if you haven't seen it. But at one point, there's this point in which Harry, who was a student, actually begins to lead a class. He leads a class for kind of the rebels of the school that say, like, we are really wanting to fight against the evil that's out there, and our professors and our headmaster. This is later when kind of the school gets taken over by some of the kind of the bad people out there. We call them Death Eaters, and the professors say you can't take Defense Against Dark Arts, or if you do, you can't really learn any skills. And so Harry Potter ends up teaching a class, and this group is called Dumbledore's Army. So today you are Dumbledore's Army, and today our class will be Defense Against the Dark Thoughts. So we're going to spin on this just a little bit. So I'm going to teach you some charms and some spells, if you will, just to kind of use that language, and with the hopes to equip you as during the season related to coronavirus, that some thoughts that might come up, right? So you might, during this season, you might be feeling all sorts of feels. Some of them might be worried. Some of you might be feeling worried about how this is going to end or play out, or how's this going to affect your schooling, or how's it going to affect kind of very certain things. Some of us are worried about jobs and income. Um, Others of us might be worried for some more vulnerable people in your life, thinking about just some people that might be prone to illness. Others of us might be feeling increasingly down, just from being isolated for so long. Some of us might be stressed about how all this is affecting your life and school, and kind of worried about kind of what this will be like when this is all done. So, um, with that said, I wanted to kind of talk through some practical tips that might help you in this process. Um, okay, so with no further ado, let's talk about some of the charms. So, the very first charm that I wanted to talk about was one that's called Ridiculous. So if you know the story, and you can totally use the chat box if you want, and you kind of recognize some of these, and I'll interact with you in there. But um, the Ridikulus Charm is used against what are called buggarts, which are these things that I'll read here. So the buggart sitting in the darkness within has not yet assumed a form. He does not yet know what will frighten the person on the other side of the door, and nobody knows what a buggart looks like when he is alone. But when I let him out, he will immediately become whatever each of you most fears. So in this cabinet, he's got this thing called a buggart, and it who knows what it is inside it, but as soon as he releases him out of this big wardrobe, then it becomes the thing that you fear the most. Here we have Ron, and he's incredibly afraid of spiders, and so he remembers one very specific spider that he is afraid of, and that you can see here. So what can we learn from that? So one of the first things that you can do is to identify what you're feeling worried about. May seem really small and perhaps simple, but it can be really helpful. So what is it, if you're feeling worried or afraid, identify what it is. And you might be able to do that by writing it down, or you can draw it out. If that's kind of a way that you like to express your feelings, but write it down and identify it. And then rather than dwelling on that thought, kind of dwelling on that fear, just like in the Harry Potter story, where the idea is to kind of think and look at that thing that you fear the most, and then you cast this charm called the Ridikulus Charm, and in that moment, the thing that you fear becomes the most ridiculous thing that you can think of, and it makes you laugh. In a similar way, rather than dwelling on that thought, that thing that you're afraid of, because it'll never change if you continue to dwell on it, is to shift your attention to something that makes you feel happier. One of the things that you can also do is to test out your fear or worry with somebody. How realistic is that worry? Or are you assuming the worst? Those can be really common things that we struggle with, and can be really helpful to think through, gosh, is this my absolute greatest fear? Is it, for maybe going back to Ron, is it likely that I'm going to see this huge spider? Unfortunately, he later does, but or is it just kind of my fear related to around that? So kind of test out the fear and the worry, and that can be really helpful if you actually have it down written for you. The other thing is to use a sense of humor towards yourself if you realize that you're thinking that thought again, and that's okay too. One of the other charms is called the Protego Charm, and this is used by Hermione at one point, where it casts a shield over and around an entire area, and she does this at a particular point in the story, where she's trying to protect her and Ron and Harry as they're kind of running away and looking for some things, and kind of casting this like shield of protection, almost if you were to imagine this like dome, this clear dome that would go around you, that would shield you. You can use this charm when you are wanting to be really intentional about what you're consuming and what you're taking in. So one of my pieces of encouragement to you is to protect your mind. Be intentional about what you're consuming. One of the specific ways that you can do that is to limit news and social media to specific times of the day. It can be really helpful and perhaps important for us to keep up with some of the things that are occurring. But on the other hand, it's probably not helpful to do that when you're feeling worried. And it's also probably not helpful when you're maybe feeling a little bit more vulnerable to stepping into worry. So, for example, for me, I know that it's not helpful for me to start looking at news right before I go to bed, because that can be a time where I'm trying to go to sleep and it can affect me being able to sleep, and that can be really hard to actually fall asleep, which might make me more susceptible to being worried the next day. So limiting news, but also, as we are all just super aware of things on social media, sometimes social media can be really hard too, right? So people might announce things or clip certain news articles, or might kind of say, please, please think about me or pray for me. This really bad thing has just happened, and it can just kind of feed that. So in ways, there are times where you might want to cast this Protego Charm around you, where you're kind of shielding yourself and being really cautious and mindful of when you're letting things in. I wanted to make a quick note that this is different than avoidance. Sometimes the way that we cope is that we never think about the bad thing. And that's, I think, gonna cause other problems, right? Like, so if you completely avoid the dark thoughts, if you will, then you may never be able to truly reckon with it. So I'm not saying to do that. I think I'm just saying be mindful of when you kind of allow some of those things to come in, and be mindful of the information that you're consuming. The Fidelius Charm. Here you can see a description of it, but basically it's a complex spell involving the magical concealment of a secret inside a single living soul. The information is hidden inside the chosen person or the secret keeper, and is henceforth impossible to find unless, of course, the secret keeper chooses to divulge it. And you can go on and read a little bit about this. And essentially what I'm hoping that you'll get from this is to think about when you're experiencing thoughts of worry or despair or feeling down, is to think about somebody that you can trust to talk to. Who could be your secret keeper if you needed that? Who could you share these thoughts and feelings with? So if you can, and if you find yourself kind of worried a lot or down, or the stress is really affecting you, I'd say reach out for help, right? Like, reach out for help, talk with somebody. And I would encourage you, maybe I'm the only one who struggles with this, but sometimes I struggle with naming thoughts that feel really silly. Like maybe I know that I shouldn't feel this way, but I do feel this way. I would encourage you to still name those things. I think it can help a lot. And I also think that as you do that, you might start to feel surprised that you're not the only one that feels that way. And I think it might make it easier for you to let that thought go. I think sometimes dark thoughts live in darkness. And when we shine light on it, and shining light can occur by talking with a friend about it, it makes it feel less invasive. And so I would encourage you to think about reaching out to somebody, or if you know somebody who might be struggling with this, reach out to them and encourage them to name some of those silly thoughts. There's another charm called Expecto Reparo, and this is actually kind of a lighthearted charm. This is otherwise known as the Mending Charm, which will repair broken things really quickly. Here we see Hermione and Ron. He constantly is getting his glasses broken throughout the story, and so Hermione is fixing his glasses for him yet again. And so here, what I would love for you to think through is when kind of in this season, try finding something that you can do that is immediately productive. Just like this charm, Hermione fixes Harry's glasses. She does this really quickly and goes on from one thing to the other. When we're in the midst of this like kind of isolated season, we have these long-term goals, or we have this idea that we've got something out there that's looming, or some deadline that we have, or a paper that we need to write, but it's in a couple weeks. Sometimes it can be really helpful to have these quick goals that we can work on that might actually give us a boost of energy and a sense of like, I've actually done something. I fixed something or I've created something. And so here's just a couple ideas for you. Paint a wall. We're all in front of our computers at this point. Maybe for the sake of this season, I don't know perhaps who you live with or your landlord situation or your family situation, but maybe you paint the wall that's always behind you. And you just do that for this season. And maybe it goes back to another color when we can all go back to normal, or maybe you leave it. But do something like that that's quick and productive right away. The other thing might be help a friend. Do something that you can do quickly, or a friend or a neighbor, right? So being able to do a kind of a smaller thing, but to know right away, like that was helpful. There might have been some tasks that you've been putting off. One of the things that I've watched in my own house is with my husband. We, for a long time, have had these goals of different things in the house. And the other day I came out of the office from working and he had just cleaned windows. He'd done some like spring cleaning and some windows that we've looked at and that had just been gross for the longest time. And he just felt so much better. Just like, although he had a busy work day, he took a little bit of time to clean some windows. And I think that helped him feel like, yeah, like I did something today. And we get to reap the benefits of it because it doesn't look so gross. So you could find something like that, do it. The Stupefy Charm. This is also one of the most, as you can see here, Harry Potter teaches his Dumbledore's army group at one point. This is one of the most useful spells in your arsenal. It's sort of a wizard's bread and butter, really. So this particular charm is a charm that kind of, it stops something in its tracks. So in the book, this somebody would say stupefy, and something would occur where it would just stop somebody right in their track, and it wouldn't stay forever, and it wouldn't last forever. But whatever kind of was coming at them, whether it was somebody that was trying to hurt them or something that was happening, it would just kind of stun somebody or something really quickly. And I think this particularly ties to some psychology things that some therapists might think about, where as soon as you recognize a dark thought, you've already recognized that this is anxious thought or a fearful thought. One of the first things that you can do is to stupefy it, to stop it. This won't always work, and I do not mean to oversimplify it, but we know the kinds of thoughts that just kind of can sit with us. And then the more and more we think about it, the bigger and bigger and bigger it can get, and it can just become this web. So one of the things that therapists will actually teach the people that they're working with is to thought stop. So as soon as you recognize, oh, that's that anxious thought, I already know that anxious thought leads me down a path that's really hard for me to get out of, I'm going to stop it. And it's just like an about face. It just kind of says no more. So this can be used regularly, and even in the story, it's used all the time. It's by no means the most glamorous charm, but it can be really helpful when thoughts are coming your way. Here we move into two more charms that I hope are helpful for you. I appreciate some of the comments in the chat box, and with somebody saying that I like stupefy better. So one of the other charms is called Expelliarmus, or it's also known as the disarming charm. And here there's a little exchange over here to the right that you can see and read about, where a Professor Lupin is talking to Harry, and he says, Expelliarmus is a useful spell, Harry, but the Death Eaters seem to think it is your signature move, and I urge you not to let it become so. He's kind of urging him to use a more destructive charm. And Harry says, I won't blast people out of my way just because they're there. That's Voldemort's job. And so here Harry is kind of saying, I actually choose to use a charm that won't hurt somebody. Expelliarmus is a particular charm where it kind of takes, in practical terms, it's when two wizards are facing one another and they've got each one of them has a wand. And if you say Expelliarmus, you actually take the wand and it pops out of their hand. And there's some incredible moments where that is particularly useful. And you might be wondering, well, what's the big deal, right? So you're just kind of taking the charm out of somebody's hand. Well, what can be so useful about it is it takes the power away, the power that was once over you, and takes it away. One of the most powerful moments, I think, in Harry Potter towards the end of the series is he chooses to use this charm against Voldemort, the worst person that you can think of in this entire story. And Voldemort uses a charm that is intended to kill him, to kill Harry, and ultimately Harry ends up winning in this season, and with that particular charm. So it's incredibly powerful. Where does this actually work out in our own life? What am I talking about? So recognize that you are the only one who has control over your thoughts. Sometimes it can be easy to kind of feel like other people can kind of make us feel a certain way. And I do think that we are affected by other people. But at the end of the day, if you can, take the power away from whoever or whatever is trying to cause you harm, and instead do what you need to for yourself. So that might be to speak truth in the presence of your dark thought, or that might be to memorize something to you that means something that's super powerful and super important in the face of whatever's coming your way that can help you fight it off. And to kind of take the power away. For those who might identify as a Christian, one of the ways that you can think about this is it might be helpful to memorize, have ready and available to you, scripture or even a hymn. I think those are can be particularly useful because it's kind of stood the test of time. You can think about groups of people at different times in their lives that have thought or sung a certain hymn, and I think that can be particularly useful. Or if that doesn't connect with you, think about somebody that you might look up to, or a poem that you might like that you can kind of have ready in your mind. So when something comes your way, you are ready to defend against it and to say or speak or sing something truthful. One other charm before we begin to wrap up. So the Patronus Charm. This, let me read just a little bit about this. So this ancient and mysterious charm conjures a magical guardian, a projection of all of your most powerful feelings. It's a difficult charm, and many witches and wizards are unable to produce a full Patronus, a guardian which generally takes the shape of the animal with whom they share the deepest affinity. So this particular charm, there's a particular scene in the bottom left corner of your screen here. You have Harry, and there are these things coming to attack him, which are called Dementors. These Dementors are known, they even kind of literally kind of suck the life and the soul out of you. And Harry sees them coming, and the one thing that helps protect him against these Dementors is to latch onto and hold onto something that makes him feel deeply joyful. And as you can imagine, that can be really challenging to do when you have some just huge despair coming your way. Sorry about that. I have a thing that's popped up in our window that I'm trying to get out of. I do not want to upgrade, but that's like the only thing that's letting me do. Oh my gosh, how do I get rid of this Zoom window? I'm assuming that everybody can see this little like Zoom window that just popped up that's talking about running out of time. Sorry about that. All right, it finally went away. You had to click it 10 times to make it go away. So thanks. So it went away finally. So thinking about this particular charm, the idea is that in the face of something really despairing or hard that's coming your way, to hold on to something that that reminds you of true joy. Not just like little things like, oh, I like to paint, or but like something deep down. And in this story, Harry is able to do that. And And so let's just talk a little bit about this. So one of the reminders perhaps to you is that it can take time to be able to do this. So here, as we think about the way Harry has done this, this isn't something that you can do right away. It takes a lot of practice to be able to, in the face of utter despair, to cling to a deep joy. So one of the things I think can be helpful is to look to somebody in your life, whether you know them or perhaps you know of them, that has gone through grief and has gone through kind of deep grief, but has still managed to hold on to joy. And so it takes practice, and unfortunately sometimes that practice might actually be going through really hard times, including things that feel like that there is no end. But for those who can, it can be really helpful to teach us some things. And in this story, it's not easy. Actually, a lot of students try to use this charm and they're unsuccessful. But as the story goes on, it's 7 books long, right? You see more and more students being able to use this charm. And I think it's a powerful reminder that, one, it's okay that we don't know how to do that right away. And 2, keep trying at it and look at those who do know how. If I can just say like a specific thing to for those that might identify with as being a Christian, I think there's a particular thing here that I didn't really realize until I was kind of preparing this. But so the Patronus, again, it takes on a form of an animal that you identify with. So for Harry, it takes on something called a stag, and then for other people, it's got a doe or other sorts of animals. I think that for the Christian, the Patronus Charm, the thing that gives you deep joy in the midst of utter despair, can take on the form of Jesus. There's some clear parts in Scripture where I think it can even point to where it's even in a good season as we think about Easter kind of coming our way. In Matthew, for example, talks about this here, which is the people living in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. So hear that light in the midst of darkness. And then later in John, talks about the light shines in the darkness and the darkness has not overcome it. So I think there's just some deep, really powerful messages in the Bible for the Christian about what this can do and how this might apply for us. Okay, we have gone a little bit over our time, but I wanted to just give you a couple resources and then talk about what we're going to be doing next week, and then we're almost done. So thanks for hanging in there with me. So where do we go from here? If you like Harry Potter and you like this series and you like a little bit of what I talked about, if you Google Harry Potter at home, a brand new thing related to kind of this season with coronavirus and encouraging people to stay home. The Harry Potter group, the Wizarding World as they're called, have launched something called the Harry Potter at Home, which is giving you free access to books. If you haven't read them before, it's starting to give you access to those you can get right away, and activities that are particularly good for kids. Some of what I've talked about is kind of throughout as I was kind of applying it, are actually some things that we call cognitive distortions and how to work and fight against those. So I provided the link here, and I'm actually gonna I'm gonna drop it into I'll drop it into our chat before we end today, or at least if not, you can search. I put on here positivepsychology.com, and you can search cognitive distortions. That can be a really good resource to kind of think about and see, like, what are just different ways that we might kind of get stuck in some thoughts that are really common, and to feel okay, like graceful towards yourself in that process, but also some ways to kind of get out of that. I was able to drop the link in the chat, so you can find that there if that's helpful to you. And lastly, if this is connecting with you around thinking about kind of worry and anxiety, but also you're wondering how maybe you have come from a Christian faith and you're wondering how these two things come together. Just recently, in the last month or two, Dr. Irene Kragel out of Calvin University actually released this book called The Mindful Christian, which puts together mindfulness and some faith-based things, which I've actually recently picked up. I ordered it and it shipped to me right before we were all kind of sequestered at home, and so it's been really helpful. So here, those are a few resources for you if it's helpful. And then lastly, what's coming up? So our upcoming wellness webinar will be led by one of our counseling interns, Nicole Tazi. And it will be at the same time next week using the exact same Zoom link that you're in right now. And it'll be specifically about depression during this COVID-19 time and how to maintain hope and gratitude. And I really look forward to that. So join us if you can. And then if you liked today or you wanted a recording or you think it might be helpful to send to somebody, probably by tomorrow, the recording will be up and ready on YouTube. All you have to do is search within YouTube Trinity Community Videos and you'll find it that way. So so thanks again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed a little bit of the Harry Potter spin on all of this. We have, you are welcome to go. I'm also going to hang out for a minute or so before Zoom actually kicks us out. And so if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat box over on the side. But like I said, I just really appreciate you coming today. So thanks so much. Oh, good. I'm glad to see that there's some enthusiasm on the side about people actually wanting to watch the movies now. Maybe that's a good coronavirus activity, actually. I'll give it just a few more minutes in case there's any questions, and then I'll pop back up on this resource page in case you wanted to see that. The other thing that you can do is you can always reach out to me directly. You can email me at stephanie.griswold@trnty.edu, and I'd be happy to help with anything or to talk through any ideas. So, okay. Well, with no further ado, I think we are done for today, and we'll see you next week.